ahead for us to get started. So the lights are on and we are ready to go. I hope that you're doing well today. You know who I am. It's Miss Hitch out of TJ. I'm here to start with you today on our little adventure. We are going to be rolling our way through some stuff with Congress, wrapping up some information on how to do these FRQs that we have. Today's a big skill day, so be prepared for that. And I don't know what it is about the first question. I cannot capture my first question. I have to put like a blank slide in there. But I had a really good question before that, and I don't know what it is. Oh, okay. Anyways, so I had a great question from Alec. So the 14th Amendment made the individual the Constitution's lowest common denominator. How can we reconcile that change with Second Amendment rights and the interpretation of the Second Amendment, which hinges on an individual right? So we're going to talk about the Second Amendment coming up here in a couple of weeks. And I mean, I really feel like it still falls into that kind of category of this idea of the community versus the individual, right? If we think about the Second Amendment and the way that it was originally interpreted and some of the conversation that was had at the founding, the idea of having arms, which was, kind of used, and it struck images of arms for defense, arms for military. Of course, people had access to weapons at that time, but it was really for the community to defend themselves. We have to remember that this is a time period in which we're kind of trying to balance the concerns of community in being able to fight off insurrection like Daniel Shay's rebellion versus being able to protect themselves. So, the Second Amendment's an interesting thing, and I don't want to give too much away, but really, if we start with that idea that it was a community concern, right, to keeping the national government out. And actually, one of my favorite Federalist papers is Federalist 24, and it talks about the concern of a standing national army and how much anxiety it caused in individuals at that time, because it brought back images of British Army quartered in private homes. We definitely see that trend following along, where we're moving more towards putting more precedent on the individual's right to access guns. Now, of course, we still see limitations on to what extent that means. There's still some qualifications that the courts have not struck down, but let's, I like the connection. It's a great way to start. Okay. So today we're going to roll back through our modified FRQ. Again, no point D here because this is the coronavirus version. So our prompt here is develop an argument that takes a position on which model of federalism, dual or cooperative, better represents individuals' interests. And again, we're comparing the two. Somebody asked me a great question. If there's like three, do we talk about all three? And the answer is no, just pick two and weigh them against each other. It's a timed writing. We don't have, you don't have all the time in the world to show the skill, nor do you have to. So let's go through this. The first thing I want to do is I want to take a minute for just a second. That doesn't make any sense, but that's okay. And go through our task verbs. So there are words that we see frequently pop up in the curriculum, and they mean distinctively different actions. So here, identify means literally just to name, right? So identifying would be insufficient in any way, shape, or form as a response to any prompt in the argumentation FRQ. It's baseline. It's just naming something like me or James Madison's Federalist 51. The next step down is a definition, and we have to define things. I mean, that's a huge component of writing from the high school level all the way up through postdoc, because we have to have a common language and know what we mean and what we don't mean. So defining is important, right? Here, I started with the definition, just baseline, that I am a woman. I have the MS in front of my name. What is that? That's a baseline definition. Checks and balances, giving a definition so we know what it is and what it isn't. Various powers and procedures set in place to minimize abusive behavior. Describe is getting more complex, and when we're describing, we're making a representation in word of a subject. So it's almost like we're looking in a mirror and trying to come up with a way of describing what I might be, right? You might describe that. You could do physical attributes. You could say she's a white lady, she's 6 feet tall, etc. All of those things are true. You could talk about my identity. She's a mom, she's a wife, teacher, athlete, whatever. Same thing with Madison's 51, right? That we're describing what it was about. Kind of, it's about checks and balances, helping prevent tyranny of the majority. Explain is the most complicated task verb that both, for the most part, you're going to run into. I mean, there is some others like compare and contrast, but this is kind of like the core of what you see in AP Gov. So explain means to take and make it known how or why something connects to something else. So connecting maybe something about me that you use in the description, you could connect that back to another identity that I had as a collegiate athlete. I swam in college. My height was helpful because I was longer in the water than my shorter opponents. Same thing with Federalist 50, or with our content-based stuff, right? Madison explained in Federalist 51 that he believed checks and balances kept branches interested in defending against intrusions of their powers from other branches. So all of these task verbs, we see them, and as we get going, because I'm going to start talking about the FRQ known as concept application next week. I know that some kids have reached out to me and said, I'm concerned that we're not going to get into that. We will. It will be starting next Tuesday. I'm going to cover all 4, even though you're only doing 2. So know that this is kind of laying some of the groundwork for some of these words that I'll be using so that we're all on the same page. All right, so when we are working for our B points, we want to describe and explain the evidence. We want to like elevate beyond that, and we're going to connect it back in our C point. So you know this, you love it, right? We're very comfortable with this. We've laid out our argument. We've got dual versus cooperative. We've got a description of all of the different variables that we're looking at. Today, I got a little crazy here by adding some evidence that came from outside of our foundational documents and court cases by putting in our quote from yesterday about Justice Brandeis and our quote from Martha Durthick. So I've got boom, 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 all of these things are lined up, and then I'm weighing, right? Which one am I going to talk about? Again, I believe I'm advising kids to not unlearn what they've already learned. So when we come to our thesis statement, still show me that counter with reasoning plus your position and reasoning. So I'm going to take the position here at a baseline that cooperation leads to universalized policy, leads to universalized policies that do not create unfair or unequal opportunities. And I have to root that into some evidence that's going to help support that. Now, again, recall that we're shooting for the B3 and B4 points, because if we have a claim that fits the bill and we are able to connect our evidence back to our claim, we will earn the B3 and the B1 point together, right? So I've got clear evidence, I'm thinking about it, I'm creating my framework, right? Remember we talked just class about framing that evidence so that you have a solid understanding of what it is, what facts in that document you want me to see, because those facts will be able to be sutured back up into your claim. All right, and so then we want to take that and turn it into a free-flowing response. I want to give you some contextualizing information. It never hurts to kind of identify, define as necessary when we're going through our evidence. I know that it may seem weird, but sometimes we have to, right? So I'm taking this and I'm stating where it comes from. The Constitution establishes necessary and proper clause, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, which allows for expansion of powers that result in expression of an enumerated power. This power must be used in conjunction with an enumerated power, most often with the Commerce Clause, to reach more challenges facing the national government. So those things are still facts, right? I'm framing and I'm telling you I'm defining what's there, and I'm giving you a little bit of an explanation as to how they're used, but I'm not drawing any conclusions from this so far, so it really isn't me moving to my C point. Martha Durthick here for my chosen document. I chose Martha Durthick, observed in her writings that major events in the American history, like the Civil Rights Movement, the Great Depression, and World Wars, led to cooperative federalism. These movements were primarily because localities and states were not equipped to deal with powers and resources to effectively and equitably respond to the scope of these challenges. Again, I'm kind of like, I'm telling you what she said, and I'm giving you a little bit more of a description of what those things mean. Okay, so today is Congress. I mean, this this one point is so much of Congress. Like, this is like multiple days. So when I saw 2.2 show up, I was like, I can't, there's no way I can talk to you about everything in 15 minutes. There's just, it's immense. So I'm going to fly through this, and in the comments section down below, there are the description for this video. There are stuff in the folder that can help you kick this out. So I should be done with this in about 15 minutes. You know, if you need to like rewind it and hear it again or whatever, that's my plan. So we have three major functions that we pretty frequently talk about when we associate with Congress. The first one is the most obvious, that they legislate, right? And legislating is broken down into all kinds of traditional behaviors that Congress is using. So they'll use committee structures by tradition, and in those committee structures, they have a three-step process where they'll hold hearings that are called by the committee chair. They will mark up or edit the bills, and there's always a report, and it's literally a report that's written by the majority and the minority about concerns or kind of why they think these things are important, and they send them out, right? Now they get put onto the calendar. You've got speaking and voting on the floor of Congress is another component that we frequently see with members, where they're actively engaged in trying to be, you know, full force in legislating. We see them doing authorizing bills in which they are creating programs, or they are creating commands for the government to carry forward and execute, which is different from appropriation bills. And appropriation bills are chunks of money that are there to like animate whatever that action is that they have created in their authorizing bill. So the next thing we see is constituent services. This is another incredibly important component. It is through representation, where we get these, they're representing our concerns on voting, speeches, oversight, intercession with federal agencies, all of these different kinds of things. It could run from aiding students, giving them letters of recommendations into our military academies, helping them with visits, helping them secure internships, all these different kinds of things. Meeting with members, that's something that you can do at this point. And actually in my school, one of the things that I've asked my students to do is to set up a meeting with the members and their staff to run past them things. So like, believe it or not, this is something that a 15, a 16, a 17, an 18-year-old is fully capable of doing at this point. Casework is the idea that they're there kind of like doing some kind of more extensive work for an individual. Maybe they need assistance and intercession when it comes to negotiating with a federal agency, or getting assistance from, you know, maybe they're overseas and need help with the State Department, something along those work. But these are very critical components because they are a servant of their constituents. And so they want to make sure that whatever casework they might be doing, that this is something that they're doing that benefits, but to the best of their ability, whomever their constituents are, because that's what their job is, number one. But number two, it also helps them run for re-election. Assisting in negotiating with federal agencies, memorials and commemorations. We see a lot of that. There's a lot of like small public bills in which they'll rename postal offices or bridges and things like that. And then assistance with grant work. If you are wanting to know more about constituent services, there is a fantastic CRS report that I linked down in the description section that you should check out. And the final part here is oversight. And oversight is a function that is an outgrowth of investigation that Congress needs to have, not only through checks and balances to ensure that they're kind of keeping track of an intrusion in their delegated powers to legislate from the people, but also that the executive branch is doing what they intended on doing. And so we see these oversight, traditionally we see them in hearings, right? This is where we see things like post the election of 2016, you saw Mark Zuckerberg hauled up onto Capitol Hill to testify in Congress. Those kinds of hearings are investigatory because they are there to kind of get a feel for how things are being executed. And the weird thing is, and I'm going to kind of like maybe complicated for a second is that you see hearings when legislation is being written and you see hearings when there's an investigation happening. It can be a little wonky. Know that it kind of can span the gap. It kind of goes back and forth. We definitely have certain hearings that we would say are far more investigatory, like the House Committee on Benghazi, the investigations done on President Trump. Those are all specifically about oversight and trying to like make determinations of how to roll forward. So just know that like sometimes it's context specific to figure out if we're talking about legislating or oversight function. They do inquiries, they send letters, they ask for meetings, they ask for materials, they do investigations, they review, they look into financing, they look to see if financing was spent the way that it was intended to be spent. They will do things like a legislative veto sometimes or run, and this is controversial because in certain contexts, a legislative veto has been declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. And a legislative veto is a line that's written into or inserted into an authorizing bill that enables the way that it's unconstitutional is if a committee by themselves is able to undo something that the executive branch has done because it violates the core of whatever that law is. So we've kind of overturned that, but there's lots of different instances in which legislative vetoes are still kicking around, in which we haven't really determined how constitutional they are. If you're wondering why the legislative veto was overturned, the reason why has to do with the presentment clauses, Article 1, Section 7, that is the core of the bill to law process. And it is a function in which you have to pass the same legislation through both houses, and then it has to be presented to the president, and the president makes a determination as to what to do, veto, sign the bill, et cetera, et cetera. And the court came back and said, hey, you want to change that, then change it, but you can't like do this thing where like only one tiny part of Congress is deciding what's the right way to enforce a law. One final thing on the legislative veto, the most famous example of a legislative veto that I can think of is the War Powers Resolution of 1973. Okay, rulemaking is another really important thing, and we're going to talk about rulemaking in just a few sessions. So one of the things that I think is important for us to recognize is that much of the structure of Congress is left largely to Congress to decide. There's a really logical reason for this. It goes back to the fact that we had over 150 years of experience in legislating prior to the writing of the United States Constitution in its present form. Well, in the original form, I'm sorry. There's like, we don't need to get into the nitty gritty of how to do this. And there needs to be flexibility and adaptability within the system. So there is really kind of 3 sections where we can look to see what does the Constitution say. I mean, there's more, but this is like the big 3. Number 1, that the House, the only constitutionally required office in the entire House is the Speaker of the House. Everything else has been determined by tradition. The Senate, the only constitutionally required position is the President pro tem, which today is kind of like a symbolic gesture of like, you're awesome, you've been here forever, because they usually give it to the member with the longest record. And the office of the vice president is supposed to be, that's like the one thing that they've said in the Constitution that the vice president was supposed to do, which is he's supposed to be the president of the Senate, or they are supposed to be the president of the Senate. So what we see here is like the rest of the structure, the power structure is ambiguous. It's just not there because it was left to them to decide, given that the founding fathers and like almost everybody at the Constitutional Convention kind of knew that logically this would all suss out in the end. We also can look to Article 1, Section 5, and we see that there is this delineation that each house can determine the rules of its proceedings, punish its members for disorderly behavior, and expel a member with concurrence of 2/3. So we do have, like, the only thing that we see about rules is that they get to decide it. And in the House, they decide it at the beginning of every single session. So that's every year, that's like January 3rd of an odd number year is the first day of a new session. They will vote the rules. It's one of the first things that they do after they swear in all the members of all the new members of the House. The Senate's a little bit different because it's what we call a continuing body. Only 1/3 of the senators are up for re-election at any point in time. And so the rules can be changed a little less, it's a little less structured in how they change the rules. So I'm pretty sure that you have seen and talked about congressional leadership. Again, the only things that we need to see here is that the big ovals, the president, the vice president, and the president pro tem are the only guys and gals that are required constitutionally. The rest of those cats are all through tradition. All right, so you've got the Speaker of the House. They're there to represent their district. They're the leader of the majority party, leader of the House. They are the third in succession, and I will say, and this might be crazy to you, I don't know, but they are actually the second most powerful position in the entire elected position in the entire government. I know that a lot of times kids are like, no, it should be the vice president. Well, the vice president's kind of like not as constitutionally important a role. They have much less kind of traditional powers for sure. And it really wasn't until you had Lyndon Baines Johnson taking the vice president out of the Senate full time and pulling them over into the White House office that you see this like, power center develop. And really it will not be until the vice presidency of Dick Cheney that we see like the centralization of power. And that's really a decision that's made between the president and the vice president. But anyways, so the House Majority Leader and the Minority Leader, they're kind of more geared at looking at legislative agenda, how to get policy through. They're like our policy wonks, whereas speakers think about they consider all the things that the party might be concerned about. When you get to the whips are those who kind of know how to put pressure on individual members. So they're like the people. They know what animates each and every single member of Congress. They know vulnerabilities. They know what can be dangled in front of a member of Congress to get them to do what the party wants them to do. So they're really critically important in that they are going to, when something is a must-pass resolution, the person who really is going to apply the pressure is going to be the whips and the deputy whips, because they are counting and pressuring or persuading members to fall in line. Now, the interesting thing about the speaker is that the speaker, when you have a divided government and they are not the same party as the president, they become the opposition leader. So that's why you see Nancy Pelosi is such a foil to President Trump, is because she has the most spotlight of any member of Congress. She has the most constitutional authority because she's third in the chain of command. And so her position right now, as every other speaker in the modern era, is really to kind of buttress the opposition party, the party out of power, against the party in power. She has far better access to the media. She has a far better understanding of her party's concerns in the House and Senate, so on and so forth. She's got resources, all the things. On the Senate side, the president of the Senate is ceremonial. They have a legislative agenda. They vote in case of a tie, but nobody really, the vice president never likes to be there unless there's some critically important thing. And we did see Vice President Pence called up for a tie-breaking vote in the Senate. And oh my gosh, all the government teachers and students across the land right now are going to yell at me now because I cannot remember what tie was broken. Was it the vote for the justice? I think it was. Anyways, you guys will yell at me. I'm sure it'll be an MFE tomorrow. Hashtag MFE, we're all good. Okay, so President Pro Tem, again, that's honorary. Nobody really kind of, whatever, it's the most senior member. They don't really like presiding over it. It's a big pain in the butt learning parliamentary procedure. So usually what they will do is just have somebody else sit in and do that as a President Pro Tem. Senate Majority Leader, this is an important job because they are there to plan the agenda. They are scheduling legislation with the floor, but they hold all the power. While they have to have an agreement with the Minority Leader, basically, even if the Minority Leader wants something, it's the Majority Leader who creates the calendar for consideration and calls bills up to be voted on. They're like the counterpart of the Rules Committee in the House. So whatever the Majority Leader says goes. I mean, they set the agenda. The Minority Leader is just there to say, sure, we'll talk about that. Okay, so we get to the types of committee. The standing committees are permanent. their subject matter. They've developed over time as we've had increasing numbers of legislation go through Congress. So we kind of funnel them in through these standing committees that allow people to have subject matter expertise and to perchance do some constituent services if it's something that corresponds with their hometown economy. And in addition to that, it creates leadership positions as well. The House Rules Committee is the timing, conditions, and schedule. They set that. They are the keeper of the calendar. It's in the House only. Like I said, the counterpart on the Senate side is the majority leader. You have select committees that are doing investigation, things like steroids in baseball and Benghazi. They are dissolving as soon as that term is adjourned or that issue is resolved. And then you have joint committees that are standing between both houses, and they're usually doing investigation or research. So they're important, but they're really it's the folks who work for the joint committees who are constantly doing research and creating reports and getting that stuff out that becomes really critically important for us to understand these major issues that are rolling through our country. Now, the committee chair is actually the first kind of power structure that we saw develop in the way back when. They became, we had subject matter to try to allow for expertise and efficiency in rolling bills through House and Senate. Over time, the committee chairs had so much power because they, just like the House Rules Committee sets the calendar, the same thing is true for the committee chair. They get to decide when bills are being heard, what conditions they will be heard under. Will it be an open door committee meeting? Will it be a closed door committee meeting? All of these things. And if you were watching the impeachment investigations, you watched the committees out of the House having a lot of control, and it caused a lot of controversy because a lot of them were done behind closed doors, as you guys know, and that was viewed as kind of barring our ability to understand things, being contradictory, and all these different kinds of accusations. So they also get to decide who testifies, if there will be a committee hearing at all, so on and so forth. And the committee assignments, what committee you're on, and you're on multiple committees in both chambers, but more in the House, is made a determination between the seniority rule and party leadership. So kind of the longer you've been around, the more access you have to some of these cool things. So the real kind of deal here is that we have two power structures that are working sometimes in conjunction and sometimes against each other. You have the party structure, which has really become far more powerful as we have seen political polarization really take off in the past 20 to 30 years. And in addition to that, you have this committee structure where you have subject matter working groups of varying levels. And if you have a committee chair who's gone rogue, who's gone off message of what the party wants, you have, the party has ways, through leadership has ways to try to get them back on task. But actually one of the more interesting things is that they have created committees so that they have overlapping jurisdictions. So if they know that they've got somebody who's parked out in one of these committees where whatever the party wants isn't congruent with what's good for that elected member of Congress, that committee chair, maybe there's, maybe their constituents would be unhappy about it, maybe it's not good for them politically, whatever it might be, the party has multiple different committees that they can send legislation through to kind of bypass somebody who might be an obstruction for political reasons. So it offers the party more influence, and also party leaders have other tactics that they use to get the party, to get membership in line, their caucuses and their committees. So really quickly, I do want to go back because I love talking to the Federalist Papers. Every time I read them, I'm like, oh my gosh, these guys like knew us before we knew ourselves. But talks about some of the concerns we had. So this quote from Federalist 58 talks about the 4 largest states will have a majority of the whole votes in the state. And since they hold the power of the purse, the most complete and powerful weapon with it any constitution can arm the immediate representatives of the people for obtaining a redress of every grievance and for carrying into effect every just and salutary measure. These states can defeat unfriendly opposition in the Senate. So we can tell here that this power of the purse is of utmost concern, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So if we go back and we think about, well, if we're concerned that giving money for doing certain things or restricting money, right, for doing things that the party wants, is a concern. How does this play out? Like, how do we decide what our agenda is? And so there's these really cool concepts in political science called the agenda setting structure and positive and negative agenda control. So the way that we think about this is there are tools that are used that you have talked about in class that are going to either allow policy to pass or will block policy. And they're constantly being used throughout Congress. Now I'm going to show you something here in a minute that's like super minutia, because there's going to be like 25,000 things. You're going to be like, oh my God, there's no way I can know them. And I don't expect you to. But some of them might be things that you've seen in class. And I want you to see, since I don't know what you and your teacher have talked about, that if we think about these things like, let's look at it, like killing a bill in committee, like cloture rule, like the Thurman rule, obstruction of judicial nominees, like granting of leadership positions, recognizing a speaker on the floor of Congress, our favorite word, quid pro quo, right? This for that. We saw that all throughout the fall, which gets to possibly political scandal and intrigue. Thinking about appropriations, things like we talked a little, well, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Log rolling, right? Creating coalition of interested members who are kind of there where you're trading votes for certain types of things. All of these are ways in which parties will flex their power. So you have ways to get people to do what you want, right? Which, if I go back to a second, is our yellow one. And then you have a way of keeping people from doing something to block policy, all of our obstructionary things, right? And then one of my favorite ones is the red ones, which is like, well, I'm a back row complainer, right? I disagree with the party structure. And so I'm going to find ways as an individual to obstruct those things. So things like filibustering, discharge petitions, publicizing dissent, going public, all of those ways are individual tools that can be used to try to stymie what the party wants out of our blue and green here. So just kind of fun stuff to think about. Now, this is Article 1, Section 7. This is the bill to law process. I'm not going to read it. The bill to law process, there is a fantastic resource that I have posted down below in the description section. It is, you should look at it to help you refresh your memory, but it's very much so process oriented. And I don't have the time, unfortunately, in 45 minutes to do all the things that I'm charged to do. So that is something that I feel like you guys are probably best geared to go and look at that yourself. And if you've ever wondered, like, are there deviations? Because I kind of look at that as like the statistical norm, right? That's what we call normal rules or ordinary rules, where it's like, if everything is picture perfect, this is how they go about doing stuff. But it's Congress and they're not usually using ordinary rules. There's a really great podcast that I also linked down below in the description, and it's a longer podcast. It's like 30 minutes, but it talks about some of the off ramps on doing the things of ordinary rules in relation to passing an appropriations bill. Of course, we have checks and balances. So you've got, the presentment clause, which requires president and Congress working together. You have impeachment. I'm sure you guys have talked all about that. You have confirmation. I'm sure you've talked all about that. Advising and consenting on a treaty. One of the things that it's like nails on a chalkboard. Congress doesn't sign treaties, the president does. They advise and consent. And it's not Congress, it's the Senate. So let's make sure that I get that one straight. Mrs. Hitchcock, don't take you guys down a road you don't need to go. They're advising. So actually, when a treaty is signed, that's like a big signing ceremony that's done between the president and the other signatory. Okay, power of the purse. Critically important function. If you read Federalist 78, talks about why it's so important. He who controls the money controls what everyone else does. I always give the analogy to my kids. If you tell them you want to fly across the country and go to a school that's on the other coast, and your parents are like, okay, you have like two kinds of parents. You have a parent who's like, no. And then fights ensue, right? Or you have the parent who's passive aggressive, who's like, sure, you can go to, the other side of the country and go to college, but you have to pay for it yourself. So they're using a passive aggressive way to get you to do what they want. And the passive aggressive way is by refusing to pay for it. I'm sure you guys have all You've probably never heard of that move, but that's what that move is. So it comes out of two different clauses in the Constitution, raising revenue, and the Article 1, Section 9 that talks about appropriations. So what comes out of this? We see mandatory spending. This is things like entitlements and interest on the national debt. It's set by law. The only way that you can change those expenditures is by changing the law. Primary example, Social Security. You cannot change how much money people are getting unless you actually go in and change the law for mandatory spending. For Social Security entitlement spending. Discretionary spending is the thing that you saw when we shut the government down. Can you believe this? We shut the government down. The government was shut down for over a month just a year ago. I had to look that up the other day and I was like, I can't believe that. That's insane. That's insane. But it's true. So that stuff that is only about a third of the total federal government expenditures at this point is discretionary spending. The largest component of that is military spending, which is roughly just north of 20% of the discretionary budget. The rest of it is all the other things, Department of Education, Department of Commerce, all of it, right? All that stuff, all the departments. Pork barrel spending gets thrown in there. It's a way to kind of grease the wheels. It's that quid pro quo. It is a general pattern of spending in which the discretionary spending, required, not required by law, is there to motivate individual members to do something politically. So it's kind of like, it's a part of that quid pro quo. It's a part of that positive or negative agenda setting structure. Earmarks are when you've actually taken a specific line item, that's a typo, good job, and you have said that it has to be spent on this specific program. And it's usually written in such a way that only like one or two companies can get it, and it's only in certain locations. So we call it an earmark because it's like letting us know exactly where it goes. There's like a whole historical thing for both of these terms that goes like way back when, but we don't have time. And then grants and aid, we talked about that. You're good. All right, so to give us an idea of how we look at these categories of spending, as I said before, about almost, 2/3 of our spending goes towards mandatory spending, right? That's what we're looking at here. If you're looking at this circle, that dark solid line on the left-hand side, that's all mandatory spending, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and other, including interest on the national debt, should be there. Generally speaking, it depends on which resource you're looking at, but most of the time I see it as included in mandatory spending. It doesn't matter. Discretionary spending can change it every year by law. That's the kind of spending that we're talking about when we're shutting the federal government down. Defense spending was up this past time around. It's been up under the Trump administration. And yep, there's a bunch of stuff there. It's a lot. I'm rushing. I'm going to skip this. Okay. So let's get to our D point, because the skill is what I really want to spend a little bit of like the next however long it takes me to get through this. So pause it here. Read the prompt, take a minute to think about it. I'm going to move forward. Okay, pause it. I'm going to move forward. So for my own edification, I'm developing an argument that explains whether appointment of senators by state legislatures or by direct election is best to protect against the abuses of the majority. Check. Okay, coming back to this, right? We have a given document, which are our three documents here. And I'm going to say thank you to Mr. Anthony Coogans up in Michigan, the great state of Michigan. I know all your kids are so excited, and so are you. I'm probably going to get a text from you in a minute that this is his language, and I really like it. Given comes from the three pieces of information: Brutus, Federalist 10, United States Constitution. Pick one and go with it, right? So you're going to go and give your given. I am going to come back around and say that I'm assuming, because you guys are amazing superstars, that you're never just going to earn the B1 and B2 point. That's only if you don't have a claim that has reasoning. I'm going to assume that you're going to knock the ball out of the park with a claim. And then if you earn that B3 point, you automatically get B1. If you earn that B4 point on our chosen, you're automatically going to get your B2. And then we're moving today to our reasoning. So let's take a look at the reasoning. I've outlined my argument. You can take a minute to like familiarize yourself with it. I'm going to move forward. Okay. So evidence. There is a logical way for us to approach evidence, and you don't need to. One of the things I'm going to say here is I'm going to present this information to you But I don't necessarily think that you need to stress out about this, because again, you have 25 minutes to do a time writing, which is there just to show that you can do your skills. It's not perfect writing, but if you were in my classroom, I would want you to know that evidence, generally speaking, there's a right way to collect evidence or to present evidence in commentary, and there's a less right way. So we're gonna spend a couple seconds talking about that right now. So again, evidence, they are facts, right? We have talked about this. They can be quantitative, like 106 bills have been passed in the 116th Congress. That's quantitative, we can number it. They can be historical dates and figures. Brown v. Board decided 1954 by the US Supreme Court. You can talk about theories, processes, and research. So if I wanted to talk about rational choice voter theory, I could talk to you about Anthony Downs and his amazing theory on people voting for self-interest. They can be qualitative quotes from sources, primary source documents like James Madison, or secondary source documents like your textbook, in which we're cobbling together and talking about things that happened a long time ago to which the author did not personally witness. So all of those things are the kinds of things that you could talk about, right? We're mostly talking about qualitative quotes, but you know, I've had kids who, depending on whatever FRQ we're talking about, even argumentation, sometimes their chosen is quantitative, and I'm not going to complain. It's a little risky because quantitative generally means you need to be like, you know, on your numbers, but it sometimes I've seen it work. So commentary on evidence is more than opinion. I want you guys to know that opinions are simply just unfounded ideas that you have that are unsupported. Like, I think it's sunny outside. I don't know if it's sunny outside because I'm sitting in my basement and I haven't seen the light of day for quite some time. But an inference is what we're looking for. And we've already talked about this. So right now we're spiraling back through something I talked to you guys about last week, which was drawing conclusions. So you want to make sure that when you are presenting your given or chosen evidence, when you're presenting it in a way that matches up with your claim, that you can show that that evidence proves your claim is correct because ... Now, this is my crutch right here, or my turn signal, I should say. I'm not going to use that. Sorry for that, for anyone who was frustrated by that. This is something I'm using as a turn signal, something I'm relying upon because it's a tool that I have kind of in my wheelhouse. That it's like language that if I use it, it's going to tell the reader that right now I'm switching lanes and I'm automatically going into my commentary section. Okay. Commentary are conclusions drawn upon available evidence. And this is the part where I'm going to tell you, but don't stress out about this on the test. Please look at me. Look right here, right here. Don't stress out about it on the test. I just want you to know, okay? So there's two different forms, generally speaking, inductive and deductive reasoning. You do this all the time, right? So if you are looking and you have a bunch of individual observations and you come to a major conclusion, that's called inductive reasoning. So if I wake up in the morning and in my neighborhood, all the sidewalks, the grass, the buildings, everything is wet, I might go, if I'm really thinking through it, I might say, maybe it rained last night, but maybe I don't have enough evidence. This is one observation before I make that inductive reasoning. So then maybe I walk a little bit further and I see, oh, the creek is way higher than it was yesterday, right? And so I see that usually if there's like a water main break, the tops of houses aren't going to be wet. Usually if, you know, maybe there was like, who knows, the sprinklers went off or something, maybe it didn't rain. All those things together lead me to the conclusion that it rained. Deductive is going from a general principle to a specific case, right? So here, saying something like, generally students who review for a given test are more likely to see improvement in their test grade. The more they review, the better they do. That's my commentary, all that stuff in red. Then I might come to the next thing and say, hey, you there, yeah, I'm pointing at you. You're reviewing for your test right this instant. Actually, yesterday I asked a bunch of questions about you guys telling me how you're reviewing. I want you to see, like, all of you, if you responded to me, you're reviewing for your test, you are more likely This is my reasoning, you are more likely to see an improvement in my test grade, right? So it's a logical way of stepping through our evidence. Why does it matter? Because sometimes evidence, sometimes if we're thinking about things, we need to think about how we're presenting evidence. We kind of don't just want to like run through it and like throw things out and be like, oh my God, it rained last night or whatever. I mean, especially when you're getting into more advanced writing, you might want to like take your time, and especially when you have time to construct an argument that's more than 25 minutes, it is important to consider how you're presenting stuff. Now, again, I'm presenting this because I want you to know about it. And if you start to practice it, maybe you become more skilled and you don't have to think about it as much. But please, please, please don't stress. Don't stress about it. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my information here. I'm going back to the idea of a direct election. That's the one that I have chosen. So I'm going to say it allows voters to select candidates that best address interests. Now I think about my evidence. I said Brutus and 17th Amendment. So how do I want to do this? If I go Brutus, I'm starting with general, and then I'm getting into specific observations, right? That's like a theory that he has, and I'm looking at specific observations. I think that's the way that I'm going to go, right? And then I can construct kind of like some commentary that might flow from that. So allows voters to select candidate that best address interests. I show you Brutus, free republic, seek the support of public through loyalty and affection. Why is this important? Because leaving representation to state legislatures means that they are less accountable to the will of the people, lack liberty, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So then I need to put it into my finished product. Now, some of you have asked me, do I need to have an introduction? Do I need to have background? Do I need to no. This is a timed writing, 25 minutes. Show that you can do the skill with the content that has been asked you to, you've been asked to know. That's it. This is not like a dissertation. No one is claiming that it is. This is like the blue book writing assignments that you or your high school teachers have done in college, that you will probably do in college. It is a short answer. It is, can you do these steps in order? So if it's not the most beautiful writing you've ever done in your life, that's okay. You saw me yesterday. I was nervous. I don't know if you guys know this. It's hard to write this stuff. I still have this sitting here and I'm like, this is not great writing. You're right, it's not. I got to show the skill. So there's no time for editing. There's no time for like fixing things up. So just big deep breath, right, my friends? We're going to get through this. So this is it. It is 7 sentences. That's it. So while the selection of federal senators by the state legislature could dilute abusive majorities through indirect appointments, the best way to protect against abuse of the majority is through direct election of federal senators, because individual voters select candidates that best address their interests. Yay. Thesis point A. Brutus 1 points out that free republics like ours require office holders to continuously seek out the support of the public through loyalty and affection won via satisfactory representation. That's B3 and B1 because I have a claim. It's logical that when voters directly elect a candidate, voters are evaluating whether the office holder was successful in representing the voters' interest. I'm not talking about Brutus anymore. That's my commentary. That's me drawing a conclusion and telling you how it connects back to my thesis. So I have my C1. Under the 17th Amendment, the method in which senators are selected moves away from indirect appointments made within the state legislature towards elections in which candidates explain why they will do the best job representing constituents. Voters, not majorities in the state legislature, are now evaluating success of candidates against individual interests. This prevents abuse of the majority. Do you see what I did there? It's called closing the loop. I went back to the language from my prompt to make sure that I have established a line of reasoning all the way through. I'm building, do you see that? I've established my theory. Here's my like one-off evidence. Now I'm making this concrete connection back through, right? And I had to do commentary there for Brutus too. Brutus in and of himself, I had to tell you a little bit about why I was drawing a conclusion about Brutus. So here's my A point. This is not an A point. Do you know why? There's no reasoning. I'm just telling you a position. Therefore, I can only earn B1 and B2. So this same essay with a unfulfilled claim is a 2. Here's my B1 point. Excuse me. Oh my gosh, I coughed. Here's my B1 point. It's also a B3 point. Why? Because I have my claim. It's a prompt. It's my given document, right? Perfect. What can I do to prepare? So many of you told me that you're outlining and taking bullet point notes on your documents so that you have them, you have your notes next to you as you sit for the exam. Yes, do it. Do it to it. You are doing awesome. Please remember, paraphrase. Don't use direct quotes. It's just risky behavior. Here's my B2, B4 point. I get both because I have a claim, right? Same thing, have a claim, all the same thing, paraphrase, et cetera, et cetera. Here's my C1 point. This is where I am drawing a conclusion from a factual description of Brutus's thoughts. Here is my C2 point. Again, I am drawing a conclusion about the 17th Amendment that specifically connects both Brutus and, well, you can't see that, both 17th Amendment and Brutus to my thesis. All right, this gets a score of 2 points. Why? There's no claim. Do I at my B3 and B4? This is the same stuff. It's the same. I just took my, no, you don't get the points, okay? This orange is a score of 2 points. Same thing. This claim is not defensible. Only B1 and B2. Okay, let's check for understanding. Which of the following scenarios best illustrates a member of Congress supporting Park Borough legislation? Blah, 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 blah. The answer is C. Why? Because you can see that person, that member of Congress right there is really looking for some very small portion of funding that is targeted for the folks back at the district to home. Coal producing coal miners, that's not pork because it's helping all coal miners. It just so happens that it also helps his or hers. You know, marking up a bill, increasing funding for military bases. We don't know that there's a ton of military bases in that member's district. The urban renewal, again, we don't know where they're from. We don't have enough information to make that assertion. The difference between the House and the Senate is that the House, I'll give you a second to read it. I gotta hurry up. A, legislative activity is more constrained by rules. We call it a more formal House. All right, debrief and summary. These are the things that we were supposed to do. Enjoy. Here's your assignment for tonight. I know you're really excited about it. Again, grab all the things to help you out with that. Have your summaries. I'm going to write live on Monday with you again. I'm so excited. I will be so nervous all weekend. And that's it. We're done. Tech issues, let us know at cb.org/tech. I'm going to bid you adieu. Please, please, please take time this weekend for you. Remember that you are important. You are more than a test. Get out there, do something good for you. Go on Zoom with a friend, go for a walk, take a bike ride, eat some food, and I will see you back here at 3 o'clock on Monday. Bye, friends. Bye.